morning, everybody. It's good to see you. I'll wait just a moment. I see some folks just kind of filtering in. Then they've been out there looking at all the goodies on the table out there, so we'll wait just a moment while they walk in. All right. Well, guys, we're ready to go ahead and start our next session. Again, we'll have a couple of sessions this evening, and then we'll have an intermission in between. There is coffee and some cookies and stuff in the cafe during that intermission, so definitely go enjoy some refreshments in between. And if you would, let's just try to keep that stuff in the cafe or out in the foyer and not bring that into the sanctuary. Just makes things a little bit easier if we don't have a mess in here and all that good stuff. So, hey, you know, one of the verses that we read this morning was in 1 Peter in chapter 3. And Peter was saying this, sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. You know, and that's what we want to do, don't we? We want to be able to share the truth in love. We want to be able to share the truth of God's word, the truth of what is real, you know, not just a theory, not just a belief, but what is real, what is the truth. We want to be able to share that in love with folks. And, you know, the reason why we've done this morning and we're doing this again this evening is just to give us a little bit of time to get equipped, to maybe think about things that we haven't thought of before and consider things, maybe learn a few things that we hadn't learned before, and then, of course, get exposed to some really good resources and materials that'll help us to learn these things even better. You know, Peter said, but be ready. You know, in order to be ready, we have to get ready, don't we? You know, we have to do a little studying. We have to do a little preparing. We need to take a little bit of time to maybe learn and consider things that we haven't before. And so that's what we want to do here tonight, is we want to get ready, we want to get equipped and start learning maybe some things we haven't learned before, so that when we are in that situation, in that conversation with someone, we will have a ready answer for them. And certainly we can prepare by learning, but we can also be ready just by relying upon the Holy Spirit. You know, and asking the Lord just to reveal those things and remind us of the things that we need as we share the gospel with people and share the truth with people and engage in these types of conversations with people in regards to science and proof and evidence and all of those good things. So, all right, that's all I wanted to share with you. And without further ado, we'll welcome Dr. Robert Carter up, and he's going to share with us again. Just on 7 evidences for a historical atom. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back. It looks like we didn't scare away everyone. I am Robert Carter. For those of you who didn't hear me earlier, I'm a speaker for Creation Ministries International out of our American offices near Atlanta, Georgia. I am going to present to you 7 reasons why we should believe in the biblical atom. Now, the last reason is the only important one, and that's because the Bible says so. We'll get there. And yet the world is clamoring that the Bible is wrong, and they're giving reasons why they believe the Bible is wrong. And so we are called to answer those questions, not necessarily to convince them that the Bible is true, because this is a spiritual matter. And yet, we see is that when the stumbling blocks are knocked aside, people are much more able to actually trust and believe the Bible. So the goal here is just to edify ourselves, to educate ourselves. Some of this is going to be a little more technical than what I shared this morning. Some of it is not going to be. So if you see something that's like, that's a little over my head, just hold on. The next slide or two, it'll calm down again. You ready? Okay. First, Genesis claims that God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. That tells us there's no common ancestry between man and any other species. That's an important consideration. It also tells us that our population started with one human being. Right after that, the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed and closed up its place with flesh, and the rib the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman. So we have Eve descending from Adam. Now there's so many theological important points here. And the fact that Eve did not come from Adam's foot is very important. The fact that Eve did not come from Adam's head is also very important. She came from his side as a helper for him to do the work that humans were commissioned to do, that is, to take care of the planet that God had made. So we can already see there's very interesting social issues here, very interesting scientific issues, and very interesting theological issues. That's just 2 verses. Yet most of even Christianity does not believe that these verses are an accurate portrayal of the beginning point of humanity. This is Dr. Francis Collins. He just recently retired from the head of the National Institutes of Health. He was the director of the Human Genome Project. I mean, that man spent $3 billion. He is, if you looked around the world, the most, highest ranking, we don't really have ranks in science, but the highest ranking, the most well-known Christian in the world of science. It's probably going to be Dr. Francis Collins. He claims to be an evangelical, and I'm not going to doubt his faith in any way, but there's some interesting things that come out when he writes about history and science. This is a quote from an article in Christianity Today. Back in 2011, they called it The Search for the Historical Adam. And they wrote, Collins' 2006 bestseller, The Language of God, A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. At this point, I like to go like this and say, hold it. You're about to hear a Christian who is a scientist give you evidence for why he believes the Bible. What do you expect you're going to hear? Adam and Eve or evolution? Well, he reported scientific indications that anatomically modern humans emerged from primate ancestors, perhaps 100,000 years ago, long before the Genesis time frame, and originated with a population that numbers something like 10,000, not 2 individuals. Ouch. I'm confused now. Where's my evidence for belief? Do you know what those numbers are? Do you know what that 100,000 is and that 10,000? That's the out of Africa theory. That's the theory that our population was reduced to an effective size of about 10,000 individuals for several 100,000 years. And about 100,000 years ago, at total random, a Y chromosome atom appeared. That is, given maybe 5,000, 6,000 men alive at the time, one of them just happened by chance to be the male ancestor of everyone alive today. They don't believe that there's only one guy. They believe there's only one guy who passes Y chromosome to the 4 billion men alive today. Y chromosome atom. They also believe in a mitochondrial Eve. Theologians have also gotten into the mix. This is William Lane Craig on the right. Bill Craig's a good guy. He's done a lot of amazing things, a lot of really good, solid exegesis of the scriptures. But he's apparently always believed the earth is millions of years old and some sort of a chimeric evolutionary creation sort of things. And recently he's been writing a lot about this, and it's a little disappointing. But even as far back as 1996, he was in a debate with Frank Zindler, who ran a big atheist organization here in America. And this is what Zindler said in the middle of that debate, knowing what William Lane Craig's position was on the subject. He said, if there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, there's no need of salvation. If there's no need of salvation, there's no need of a Savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. He just said that if you get rid of the first Adam, there's no need for the last Adam. You can't explain why there's suffering and death in the world. You can't explain why death is a punishment for sin. You can't explain why Jesus hung on the cross. Whoa. It's interesting that that formula, no first Adam, no last Adam, was known by Charles Darwin and his friends, and we know it because they were writing it in letters to each other. They knew the spiritual implications of the evolution-creation debate, and they portrayed this as strictly a scientific endeavor. It never has been. You okay? All right. The first reason why we should believe in the biblical Adam is the number of people alive today. We just literally, a couple months ago, clocked 8 billion people. The Bible claims that we started from 8 people. Get rid of Noah and his wife, actually, Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their 3 wives is 6 people about 4,500 years ago. How do you go from 6 people to 8 billion people in only 4,500 years? That sounds like a challenge, doesn't it? Well, if we look at the population graphs for world history, I got this from the census.gov. I don't know why the U.S. Census is trying to push evolutionary theory, but they do. But they've got the world population, maybe 800,000 people about 10,000 years ago. And it remains pretty flat for a long time. And then it starts going up, and we enter this exponential growth phase until today, when we have, in this case, at this time when I grabbed the data, was 7 billion people. Does this equal millions of years or thousands of years? Well, I tell you that the beginning part of this chart is imaginary. If there was 800,000-ish people for hundreds of thousands of years with an average population size of 30 years, an average lifespan of about 30 years, there should be about 800,000 graves every 30 years. They're not there. And these people were supposedly spiritual-like people who buried their dead. Where are the graveyards? It's as if they never really existed, which is interesting. But if you start with 6 people 4,500 years ago and double that to 12 people 150 years later, and double that to 24 people 300 years after the flood, and you double that to whatever, keep on doubling it every 150 years, which is really slow, you'll end up with a modern population size. Human populations double much more quickly than once every 150 years. It is trivial to shove 8 billion people into 4,500 years. In fact, we get to ask the question, why are there only 8 billion people? Well, the answer to that is most people in history have died of starvation, warfare, and disease. That is what, in fact, warfare has probably kept the population in check more than anything else. Population biologists, they've estimated that if it wasn't for World Wars I and II, there would be more people in Europe than are in China today. It is easy to fit the world population into the biblical timeline. Therefore, that is not a reason to reject the idea of a biblical Adam. Point number 2. There's a piece of DNA that is shared amongst men and men only. It's called the Y chromosome. It's a short little piece of DNA. It's only about 60 million letters long. And fathers pass it to their sons only. And the sons pass it to their sons. And the sons pass it to their sons. Every once in a while, a mutation will occur as it's being passed along. And that mutation makes a new branch on the family tree. So me and my father, or my father and I, probably share the same Y chromosome. But my grandfather and I probably don't. There's probably a mutation or two in there. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather and I certainly don't have the same Y chromosome. There's going to be several mutations in there. So as my family has grown from William Thomas Carter, as far as I know, the first, who came out of Ireland in 1845 during the Irish potato famine, and his son William Thomas Carter, his son William Thomas Carter, his son Robert William Carter, his son Robert William Carter, and me, Robert William Carter. There's all these cousins and second cousins and third cousins in my family. And probably we're on different branches because each one of us is a slightly different Y chromosome. Is that easy enough to understand? I'm going to show you a tree now of all the major Y chromosome families in the world. As men have been born over time, some men have picked up a mutation that starts a new branch. And if that man successfully had children, that branch will be propagated through time. But strangely, looking at this tree, I could literally spend hours describing the history in this tree. Like the fact that here are Native Americans, and here are 80% of Europeans, more closely related than they are to the Chinese, or the pygmies in Africa, the Bushmen out in the Kalahari Desert, or the fact that 90% of African men branch off from non-Africans, that branch off from non-Africans, that branch off from non-Africans. Therefore, this giant group of African men did not arise in Africa. They invaded and took over. Oh, there's some cool stuff here. And it goes on and on and on. But looking at this tree, if I draw a bullseye toward the center, Noah is, see, I did a little off center on purpose. Noah is somewhere in the middle. Mutation is random, so you can't just count up mutation and say the exact midpoint is where Noah was. But that circle represents only a few hundred mutations in only a few hundred generations. And the mutation rate is at least 1 per generation. It's probably as far as 3 per generation, depending upon how you count it up. In this particular study of Danish men, father-son duplicates, they did all these father-sons, they sequenced their Y chromosome, several hundred of them, and they said it's about 3 per generation. It is trivial to put all this diversity, even the extreme ones on the right, with 3 mutations per generation. If you take 4,500 years and divide it by 30 years per generation, which is the average generation time, that's 150 generations. Maybe some families have as much as 200 generations. Okay. The amount of diversity that we see on the Y chromosome fits the biblical time frame. The evolutionists do not want you to know that. Third reason to accept the biblical Adam is the fact that a Y chromosome Adam and a mitochondrial Eve exist. So on the left there is the Y chromosome tree I showed you. On the right is the mitochondrial tree. There's a little piece of DNA that mothers pass to their children. Sons don't pass it to their children, but daughters do. And because of that, we can sequence these, we can look at all the diversity in the world, and we can build a family tree of the female lines. And they go, look at, do you see this pattern? You see the explosion? That's an indication of a rapidly growing population. In the center of the explosion is the ancestor or the ancestress. And this is only dozens, for the mitochondria, dozens of mutations to explain everyone in the world. At most 100. In 150 to 200 generations, boom, that's right there with a known mitochondrial mutation rate. So not only do we have a Y chromosome Adam, a man who gave rise to all the men in the world, we have a mitochondrial Eve, a woman who gave rise to all the women in the world. And both clocks indicate a few thousand years. The fourth reason to accept a biblical Adam is the amount of genetic diversity sitting in this room. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to pick 6 people who aren't really related. I don't think they're very related. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are any of you related by blood? Probably not. That's 95% of the world's genetic diversity. Now, there's more genetic diversity amongst Africans, so you need 1 or 2 fewer Africans to get that much. You probably need 1 or 2 more Icelanders to get that much. All of the world's genetic diversity, essentially, is sitting in this room, because I do see people from several different continents. That's another interesting question. That's for another day. The origin of races in the biblical model. It's actually pretty easy to answer, but that's just another talk. So being that there's not that much genetic diversity, that's something that puzzled evolutionists. When they looked at humans, they said, whoa, wait a minute. From one end of the planet to the other, there's not a lot of diversity. That means we had to come from a small population. Not a biblical population, of course not. That's why they invented the out of Africa scenario with this bottleneck, where we went through this long bottleneck of only a small number of people, and then during that bottleneck of only 10,000-ish people for a long time, we lost most of the diversity, because when you have a small population, you get lots of inbreeding. And inbreeding, you know what happens. Francis Collins again, speaking at a Christian Scholars Conference at Pepperdine University. There's no way you can develop this level of variation between us from 1 or 2 ancestors. Ouch. His colleague Dennis Venema is a professor at McGill University in Canada, I think is McGill, and a colleague at him at this organization called Biologos. He said, you'd have to postulate there's been this absolutely astronomical mutation rate that has produced all these new variants in an incredibly short period of time. Those types of mutation rates are just not possible. It would mutate us out of existence. He's right and wrong at the same time. If all the genetic variation in this room had to arise through mutation, that's too much mutation. That would be thousands of mutations per generation. We'd be dead. But wait a minute, who says all the variation comes through mutation? He's assuming that Adam was 100% homozygous, had no genetic diversity on all of his chromosomes. But what if God put like a tall gene and a short gene? Blonde hair, blue eyes. Or blonde hair, brown hair, blue eyes, brown eyes. Why wouldn't God have front-loaded Adam's genome with lots of diversity? And so that as the generations go and go and go, you start seeing different types of people pop out because God pre-programmed into Adam. Why would you assume everything comes through mutation? That's actually kind of ridiculous. Plus, the common mutations that we share don't cause disease. The rarer a mutation is, the more likely it is to cause disease. The more geographically restricted a mutation is, the more likely it is it's a new mutation. Because if something is spread around the world, it was at the Tower of Babel. It was on the ark. It was probably in Noah. Something that's rare, like the red hair I used to have. Oh, man, I miss that. The hair I used to have, miss that too. Red hair is only found amongst people of Scottish and Irish descent. That is a mutation that occurred in the population, maybe as they're migrating through Europe or maybe after they arrived in the northern British Isles. Blue eyes is really associated with people of Scandinavian descent and the areas the Vikings conquered in the Middle Ages. In fact, you can look at a map of the distribution of blue eyes in the world. It is a map of the Viking invasions of the Middle Ages. Very interesting. But not all Vikings have blue eyes. In fact, strangely, the first people to move up into Europe, like we have Neanderthals. It's obviously the earliest cultural horizon is Neanderthals. And they're human, by the way. That's, again, another talk. Maybe Joel's going to touch on that a little later. Then you had dark-skinned people move into Europe. They had blue eyes and dark skin, almost all of them. It's weird. It's a phenotype we don't see today often. But they carried the genes for blue eyes and they carried the genes for dark skin. They're the hunter-gatherers, and they lived all over Europe successfully for a very long time. And then this mixed group of people moved in from modern-day Turkey who had farming technologies. And farms equals food, and food equals children. And every time humans have farmed intensively, the population has exploded. And that exploding population grew into Europe and overtook the former lands of the people that first lived there. Okay, that's totally aside. I'm supposed to be talking about this. So there are theologians and scientists in the Christian realm who say you cannot use Adam and Eve to explain the world population. And I say nonsense for all the things I just said. I wrote an article, The Non-Mythical Adam and Eve, Refuting Errors by Francis Collins and Biologos. You can find that on creation.com. And all I did is I looked at the genes found around the world, and I say, this is really easy. In fact, when I picked out those 5 or 6 people before, did you know that you have 1/3 of the world's genetic diversity? In you alone. Did you know that you have 1/3 of the world's genetic diversity? Well, if you have 1/3 of it, and all the diversity is basically sitting in this room, and if that diversity doesn't cause disease, it would be really easy to shove all of that into one person. Adam. Trivial. So that answer is actually, that objection doesn't fly. Okay, this is going to be a little technical. I'm warning you now, but don't turn off your brains. Just see if you can follow me here. The 5th reason to believe in a biblical Adam is a distribution of the genetic variants. Some of the genes that we carry are very rare. All of you carry letters in your genomes that no one else in the world has. They're mutations that you got while you're developing, and you have them, no one else has them. Okay. If you were to graph that Well, okay, I gotta say it this way. In Adam has 2 of each chromosome. That means that if you look at his chromosome number 1, you compare his 2 copies, it might have all exactly the same letters. All of a sudden, maybe at position 1,000, he has an A on one copy and a G on another. And go down, maybe at position 952,963, he's got a C on one copy and a T on another. He can only have 2 versions. He's only got 2 chromosomes. That make sense? So all of the initial alleles in the population are at a 50-50 ratio. If we descended from Adam, I would expect to find a lot of genes, alleles, variants, that are 50% of some people and 50% of other people. And we found almost none of them. This is from the 1,000 Genomes Project. I took the chromosome 22 data of all the 2,000-ish people in that, and I counted up the frequency of the letters along their chromosomes. And almost all the letters are only found in one person. 2 people, maybe 10 people. Almost all the variation is very, very rare. Where is the big peak at 50? It's not there. When I did this, I said, ooh, this looks like evolution. This looks like all the variation only arose through mutation. Now, through random chance and maybe some natural selection, something that is rare can over time become more common. But it's very few common and very many rare. That's a pattern you'd expect in deep time evolutionary ideas with only mutation producing variation. So, are we wrong? The answer is no. We have a computer program that I use. It was written by Dr. John Sanford, who's a geneticist, and some computer programmers who know amazing things. It is the most sophisticated evolutionary modeling program ever written. And it was written by creationists because we wanted to know. And we wanted to run evolutionary scenarios to see if it worked. They never do, but we ran a population model of 10,000-ish people for hundreds of thousands of generations. And we took a normal mutation rate and we allowed them to accumulate over time. And some of them are lost and some of them are naturally selected, and we just let it run and run and run and run and run. And we got that blue line. And we said, oh no. The evolutionary model approximates the data we see, and the data look like an evolutionary model. But then we kept running new models. We said, okay, let's make an evolutionary Adam and Eve model. Well, let's let evolutionary processes happen, and then we'll pick one man and one woman, kill off everybody else, and restart the population from that man and that woman. Then we said, okay, now let's have a biblical Adam and Eve model. There's nothing before them. We start with Adam and Eve, and we front load their genomes with 50-50 genetic variation, tens of thousands of variants, which should produce a peak at 50. Let's take another model. Let's take Adam and Eve, let them start having children for about 1,500 years, and we'll kill off the whole population and restart with 6 people. That's Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their 3 wives, and let the population grow for another 4,500 years. Every single one of those non-evolutionary models fit the data beautifully. There's no reason to reject the biblical Adam based on the fact that most of the variations in the world are rare. You can look up the paper if you're interested. The 6th reason to believe in a biblical Adam is the fact that a molecular clock does not really exist. In order to say humans and chimpanzees have been separated by 6.5 million years, they have to use what's called a molecular clock. That is, an assumption that mutations accumulate at the same rate in all populations, across all time, across all geography, no matter what the conditions are. So if you can count up the number of differences between 2 individuals or between 2 species, you can then multiply by the time factor, and you know how long they've been separated. Does that make sense? But what if there's no molecular clock? I want to point out something. In the mitochondrial tree here, this particular group, HVR, represents about 80% of Western Europeans. I have group H16. Most of you Europeans in here are H. Some of you are I. Some of you are J. or K or something like that, but most of you Europeans are H. But all these people go back to an ancestress, right where that red dot is. A woman in the past who lived and somehow who became the ancestress of millions of people alive today, maybe even 1 billion people. Well, that's an interesting thought. Could we identify her in some ancient genealogy? Was she one of the wives of Shem, Ham, or Japheth? Interesting questions. But if all these people that are represented by these little branches here came from one person, and the branch length equals the number of mutations, then these people have twice as many mutations as these people. Can you see that? In the same amount of time, from the same family, some people pick up twice as many mutations as their closest living relative. Therefore, there is no molecular clock. You can't say this many mutations equals this much time. And if you look here, these people way out here compared to these people who have the same ancestor. This person's flying way out there compared to these people. There's violations of the clock all over the place. And therefore, when you look at the African-specific branches over here to the right, and the Y chromosome over here to the right, you do not know that those are older branches. In fact, you cannot know. Therefore, you cannot conclude that we had to come out of Africa. In fact, the Bible says we came out of Ararat and then out of Babel after that. Oh, there's so much more and more and more. I wrote another computer program. Here I'm trying to calculate how many mutations happen per generation. Now, interestingly, scientists have shown that the older a man is, the more mutations he passes on to his children. Why is that? Well, because of the birds and the bees. Let me explain it this way. Ladies, when you are growing in your mother's tummy, from fertilization to the point where your ovaries are finished is only 22 cell divisions. That's amazing. And those egg cells are held in protective custody sometimes for 40 years before ovulation. That's a wonderful system because the more time cells divide, the more mutations they accumulate. Women, your egg cells are in protective custody, held in stasis. Now, the chromosomes are fragile, and so the older the woman gets, the more likely you have to have a child with some chromosomal abnormality like Down syndrome or something like that. But most mutations actually come from the man because in the male developmental cycle, it's about 32 cell divisions before his reproductive cells are ready. And at puberty, they start to divide, and they divide and divide and divide until the man dies. And as they divide, they add more mutations. And the estimate is 1 to 2 extra mutations per year. So a 20-year-old man might have a child with, 50 extra mutations. But a 60-year-old man would have a child with closer to 100 extra mutations. Double. What about a biblically aged man? Who's the oldest man in the Bible? Who's the oldest father in the Bible? Not Methuselah, he's the oldest guy. Who's the oldest father known in the Bible with a known time where a child is born? Noah, who was over 500 years old when Shem, Ham, and Japheth were born. Noah would have been genetic poison to the future population. So in my computer model here, what I'm showing is over time, the average mutation rate per year. Now, if I ran this again, I would get a different distribution of dots, but there'd be some really high ones in the beginning. This is average. So if Shem has a child when he's, let's say, 400 years old, well, his great-great-great-great-great-grandson could have a child when he's 20 years old in the same year. The average, there'd be one guy with hundreds of mutations and one with 20, born in the same generation. When we look at these trees, the center of this tree is not time. It's the age of the patriarchs when they had a child. And old people would have had a lot more mutations than the average mutation rate. Therefore, you can go from here to here, boom, quickly. You don't need thousands of years for mutations to build up. It can happen in one generation. There's no reason to reject an idea of a biblical Adam based on those trees. They're easily explainable using Scripture. You good? And some of you are like, what on earth is he talking about? Okay. At least you're getting an idea here that we can be confident about this. The seventh and most important reason to believe in the biblical Adam is the Bible says Adam was real. Christians, we don't need more than this. And yet, for someone like me, I need to know. I need to answer. I don't like having unanswered questions. That's what the first part was about, answering those questions. Actually, answering the questions I was asking, questions that troubled me. But in Scripture, the Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The man became a living creature. Done. What else do you know? What else do you need to know? Well, okay, how about 1 Corinthians 15:45? Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. You don't get a last Adam unless you have a first Adam. There's a lot of Christian theology that hangs on historicity of Adam. We do not need so-called people outside the garden that never existed. We don't need them. We have the population growth curves. We have the amount of genetic diversity. We have the fact there's one woman and one male ancestor of everybody. The fact that you can put all that genetic diversity into Adam alone. The fact that all those facts I just gave you, they all are commensurate with a biblical Adam. We don't have to run away. More information in my DVD, Mitochondrial Eve and the Three Daughters of Noah. Here I am as a geneticist trying to explain that modern geneticists have discovered evidence of Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel, and it's in the human genome. Here's the high-tech cell, which I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite things I've ever given in public. It is me, the geneticist, trying to explain how the human genome works, and it is an awe-filled presentation. It is our genome is the most sophisticated computer program anyone has ever seen. And we're learning more about computers as we're looking at the genome saying, oh, that's how God did it. Evolution's Achilles heel is out there for you. The book and the documentary, powerful information. I wrote a chapter in there on genetics. Some of the information that I just showed you is in that chapter, but I've learned more since over the last couple of years, so I just gave you a few more things that I hadn't been able to write down there. And I'm going to leave you, before we break for some questions, with 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that's in you. You do it with gentleness and respect. My friends, we can stand confidently and competently on the Word of God and defend it without fear. And yet we do fear. And we fear ridicule. Ridicule is the enemy's best weapon because it makes Christians be quiet. And the only way to overcome that is to get an arsenal of answers. And that's what Creation Ministries is here for. We're helping you answer the questions that might be troubling you. Okay. That was the fastest I've ever given that talk. And I did that on purpose because if I go for an hour and just step down, it's too much information. It's too fast. And then you have no time to ask me and explain anything that maybe I didn't do very well on. So I'm beginning an hour slot, and I would like to take 15 minutes. Then we'll take a couple of minute break before Joel comes up for questions. And if we don't have any questions, fine, I'll just step down. But the rules for the questions are this. Please don't ask me anything that deals with end times theology, Bible versions, the role of men and women, free will versus predestination. If you ask that question, I'm like, hey, we got a sermon topic for next Sunday. It would not be fair. I'm going to guess that I believe basically everything that's preached from this pulpit, but I do not want to be tempted to contradict anything. That would not be fair. So those questions are off the table. Anything scientific is fair game. I don't promise I have an answer to everything, but I'll try my best. And I'll try to give you a short answer and then point you to a place where you get a longer answer. Is that okay? And it doesn't necessarily have to be about this. It can be about something from this morning or something else. But I suspect the first couple of questions are going to be based on genetics. But let's go. Anyone brave enough to ask the first question?
Yes, sir.
So
multi-part question. Do we see more genetic diversity in other animals? Yes. Chimpanzees have 6 to 8 times more genetic diversity than all the people in the world, and there are not that many chimpanzees. Part of that is because they've been subdivided into little populations, little tribes. But the other part is they just have different genetics. They have different repair enzymes, different population history. You can't just look at two things and think they're the same. They're very different from us. Is there like a Y chromosome atom in chimpanzees? You know, I've never even asked that question. That's a very interesting question. I don't know if we can answer it yet. We didn't have a good chimpanzee genome until about 10 years after the Human Genome Project. Now we have dozens of chimpanzee genomes, but we don't have millions. And we have millions of human genomes. Ancestry.com, 23andMe.com, the 1,000 Genomes Project, the 10,000 Genomes Project, 100,000 Genomes Project. The U.S. government just launched a Million Genomes Project. We have millions of human Y chromosomes, and we can very easily build that tree. I don't know if we can do it for other species. But what an interesting question. We'll be able to answer that later. Anybody else? Did I blind you with science?
Yes.
Sir?
Could you elaborate on this morning's talk? You had the illustration of the smallest electronic engine, the ATP, and it was responsible for future development of more ATP. Could you just kind of review that again? I found that fascinating.
I'm not online. I should have put myself online. My phone's back there, so I can't use my phone as a hotspot. I might have, hold on a second. Oh, you're going to come up here and get me online?
Yeah. CCR
Boom,
sanctuary.
boom, boom, boom.
Just do CCR.
Yeah, boom.
Capital G, Genesis 1:1.
Oops. Okay, it'll go, I'm sure, in a minute.
Yeah?
Okay, I'm going to go to creation.com here. And I'm going to type in spaghettification. No results. Because I can't spell. No, I'm going to go, okay. Hold on a second. I'm going to go to my YouTube channel. And I'm just trying to pull up a chart. I have it on my spare drive, but not on this. I'm cycling down through all my video list here. I'm not trying to promote my own video channel. I'm a CMI employee. Just saying. Here it is. Boom. I'm not going to play the video. But what I'm going to do here, because I don't have a bigger picture of this, the ATP synthase motor is up here, and this diagram is showing all of the things that must occur to produce one protein in the ATP synthase motor. You have to go through, I shouldn't have even gone through the bottle, you can't even see that. You have to take the gene for that protein. You have to copy it into RNA, that requires ATP. You have to cut out the introns and join the pieces of the gene together, that requires more ATP. And it requires proteins, which are enzymes, to cut the DNA, and they have to be manufactured through the process I'm describing. So you have to have all those processes, you have to have all those enzymes in place to take a section of DNA and make it a piece of RNA. The RNA then has to go through a thing called a ribosome, which is made of proteins, which requires more ATP. And the ribosome will take transfer RNAs, which are manufactured using ATP. And they're on the top is an amino acid, which is attached to that with an ATP. And it'll run through the ribosome, which will manufacture the protein, which burns ATP to power the process. And then it'll be glommed on by these things called chaperones. Chaperones, which are proteins, which require ATP to make. And they'll bring it into this gigantic molecule called chaperonin, which is a giant protein, which requires ATP to make. And then it'll be folded. And then that thing right there is probably going to be modified, because almost all proteins are chemically modified by the cell. They stick weird things on it. They cut them. They move them. They bend them. They do weird things to proteins. And then that is ready to go into your ATP synthase motor. Oh, but what I didn't say is those transfer RNAs, almost all of them are chemically modified with another protein designed to go over here and make one change to it, another one to make one. Most of them have about 15 modifications. All those things are done by proteins, which I just described, the protein manufacturing process that all uses ATP. You need millions of ATPs to make one ATP synthase motor. So the question is, what came first?
What's taking place is what time frame?
What time frame is that taking place in? The ATP synthase motor is spinning blindingly fast, and it's, you know what? I'm going to do something else here. Where's my, there it is. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and open up that video, because I use that video in a talk. Which talk? Did we have? We did it this morning? Oh, that's why I remembered it. So it sounds really familiar. I've given a lot of talks lately, and I did a workshop at the Creation Research Society meeting this week, and basically it was me talking for 6 hours on everything I've ever done. And so everything is fresh in my mind. Okay, that motor right there is what you're talking about, that? To make that, no, I showed you this, but I didn't show you the process of manufacturing a protein, right?
Yeah, you did.
I did. Okay, did I show you this? Oh, look at that. I showed you everything. Okay. Okay, so that motor right there requires, if I go fast, I'm not going to find it. If I go slow, it's right here. Okay, we'll watch this one again. Okay. There's a nucleotide. That nucleotide requires ATP to manufacture. There's DNA. That DNA requires many different DNA repair mechanisms made of proteins that require ATP to manufacture. That ribosome there is a combination of RNA and proteins that requires much ATP to manufacture. This process is going through here. It requires ATP to open up the strand, to add the nucleotides, to close up the strand, to take care of the winding, because when you pull a string like that, you're going to make knots in both directions, so you have to unkink it. That requires more ATP. That RNA there, we're not even showing you how complex it is and what happens after it kicks out of the polymerase. But that RNA now has to be manufactured into a protein, which takes these things, which are made of protein, and they've been charged with an amino acid on the top and chemically modified in a dozen different ways by other proteins. And this machine requires ATP to work, and it'll just manufacture, over time, 3 letters at a time, a protein. That protein has to be folded. Most proteins will fold improperly if left to themselves. So these yellowish, we colored them yellow, these chaperone molecules grab onto that protein to prevent it from folding. By the way, each one of these chaperones was manufactured in this way. It takes a massive amount of ATP to make each one of those. That is then brought into the chaperonin molecule, which will take in that unfolded protein, and we don't know what happens on the inside of this yet. This is multiple PhD dissertations and Nobel Prizes here. We haven't figured out inside this thing yet. But somehow, the thing closes up, folds up the protein, and spits it out on the other side. Now maybe that is part of your ATP synthase motor. We'll chemically modify that a few dozen times probably and stick it into the motor. This cannot exist without intelligent design. Because it's not just what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's what came first, the ATP synthase motor, the ATP, or this protein, that protein, this protein, that protein, this process, this ability to transfer one language to another, this thing here, this thing here, this thing here, this thing here. All of these things have to work or you don't get that. So I call it the spaghettification of irreducible complexity. How fast is this happening? Translation of a protein happens in real time, I'm guessing 10 letters a second, something like that. And And then the ATP synthase motor is spinning at probably 100,000 RPM. You have gazillions of them. It's uncountable. Your mitochondria are studded with these ATP synthase motors. And also, people looking at them under really high magnification, they realize they're not randomly distributed. They're in patterns. And the patterns, like stars and weird things, they're optimally designed to produce as much ATP as possible. If you randomize the positions, you would actually produce less ATP. Crazy stuff. I don't know what question you asked me anymore. That was 10 minutes ago. We good?
Yeah, I just asked you to elaborate.
Oh. Okay. Any more? In the back.
When you were reviewing the Y chromosome chart, you were able to derive that you could see where Vikings had come in with their diversity, occupied an area, and then you saw that come out. Have you noticed other historical events from the rest of your chart that kind of you can see it in the diversity as well?
When the Chinese settled the Yangtze, sorry, I should answer the question. Do I see any other historical events in this chart? And yeah, there are tons.
Yeah.
When the Chinese settled the Yangtze and the Yellow River valleys and invented rice cultivation, their population exploded. And it grew and grew and grew. And that's this right here. This is an example, this fan-like pattern, the population just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. Because in a growing population, any individual is more likely to have a child. So if they have a new mutation, your branch stays. In small populations, most people are lost, and so most of the branches get pruned. And you get like branchy, leggy things like this, which is the pygmies and the Kalahari Bushmen. Very small populations have been very small for a very long time. We can see the origin of the Indo-European languages right at that point. The reason that Hindi is so similar to French, yep, they have root words in common. French, German, Italian, English, and Hindi. This is the Indian-Pakistani branch of that family. This is the European branch of that family. Boom. That's the origin of the Indo-European language families. We have Q here. This is Native Americans, and it's one or two people in this that are not Native Americans are actually from Asia. But Native Americans obviously came from Asia a short time ago, and it's about the same time as the Indo-European language family is arising in the steppes of Asia, north of the Caspian Sea. Hey, you Europeans, you think you came from Europe? You didn't. You came from the grasslands of Asia. And then, I said earlier, you had the Neanderthals, and then you had the dark-skinned, blue-eyed hunter-gatherers, and then you had the light-skinned Europeans that moved in. Those people even aren't Europeans. The Europeans are still living out in the grasslands, and later on in history, this massive wave of people moved in and took over. And that's 75% of the European DNA comes from that massive wave of people who invented the horse. Horse had to be invented. Yes, it did. Old horses, you couldn't ride them. Their front legs weren't strong enough. So they bred strong horses, and they hooked them up to carts. And all of a sudden, this massive population was mobile. They didn't have to stay near a water source. And they spread westward into Europe and southward into India. We have people over here that are in Papua New Guinea and people up here that are in Papua New Guinea. So we see that the Papuans were settled by two very different branches of the family tree. And I said earlier that this is 90% of African men. I said that this talk, right? Yeah. Okay, I get lost. I said so many things. But if that's true, then we can see a giant invasion of Africa a short time ago. Maybe a third of the way back to Noah's flood, maybe a quarter of the way back to Noah's flood, depending on the mutation rate here. And these people invaded and took over, just like these people invaded and took over Europe. Now, the Chinese people are one of the few places in the world where they look settled, but I just read a report of an ancient individual found in China that is not like the modern Chinese. There were people living there, little splinter groups, little hunter-gatherer peoples doing their thing. They didn't have rice farming. They never got big populations, and as the Chinese population grew and grew and grew, it just engulfed everyone around them. And then they spread down into the islands, and most of the people on a lot of the South Pacific Islands, the Western Pacific Islands, like Indonesia, Malaysia, the coastal peoples have Chinese DNA. The highland peoples don't. In fact, there's 10 different branches of the Austronesian language family that are found on the island of Taiwan in the highlands. These people are not native Chinese speakers. One of those languages families is found between Taiwan, Hawaii, and Easter Island. So the Pacific Islanders came from Taiwan. That's amazing. That's cool. That's what the language tells us. The genetics, I don't remember which one it is. I just forget. The genetics also tells us they came from Taiwan. The main way. There's other people who moved in later, and there's been mixing of people, because people are people. You know what people do. Genes get mixed over time when people, border each other, shall we say. All right. It is now 7:01. I ran late. I think we need to take 5 minutes. Why don't you make the call? And then you can call people in as we start. My good friend Joel, I love this man. He's extremely smart. And he's going to tell you some really interesting things. So just hold on. All right.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, guys. I hope you enjoy that. We have one more session to go. So let's just take a short break, 10 minutes. Again, we have some refreshments in the cafe. And again, if you would just keep those things kind of out there and not bring them into the sanctuary, that would be much appreciated. But let's take a quick break, and we'll meet back in here quickly in 10 minutes to start our last session. Are we hot? Oh, we're hot. All right, guys. If you would, make your way back into the sanctuary. We'll be starting here in just a couple of minutes. I know that it is difficult to leave the coffee and cookies. They're quite delicious, but we've got good things in here, good things in store. So, all right, I think we got most everybody back. All right, guys. Well, we're ready to start session 3, session 2 for this evening. And so let's welcome Joel Tay as he comes up to share with us for this final session.
Oops, what happened? Good evening. Okay, so for those of you who were not here, you'll be wondering why, if I haven't spoken to you, you must be wondering why I sound different for most of you. That's actually because I come from the other side of the world. I'm actually from Singapore, and now I live in Georgia, near Atlanta, 1 hour from Atlanta. And I work for Creation Ministries International. So that's my family. And I've been with Creation Ministries for the last 6 years. So for those of you who were not listening to our earlier, for those online who were not here, Creation Ministries, we are an international ministry. So every year we go to churches, we give talks like that. And we have a website with about 15,000 articles about creation and evolution. That's creation.com. So if you have a question about this, you can always search our website. It's very likely we will have an article related to your question. And if we do not have anything there in those 15,000 articles, you can always submit a question to us. But before I get into this topic of creation and evolution, today I'll be looking at the bones. Okay, I'm standing at the side because, if I stand here, you just see my eyes. So I like to stand at the side. But one of the degrees I have is a degree in evolutionary biology. And this was about 16 years ago that I graduated. And many people are, they're curious, why do you study evolution? Well, I believe that, evolutionary biology and this topic about ape man, what do you do with Neanderthals? What do you do with Lucy and things like that? This is a stumbling block for many Christians. And I believe that when we look at the evidence and we start with what the Bible says, things begin to make much more sense. So let's deal with this topic of human evolution. So when I say human evolution, what do you think in your mind? What's the picture that comes to your mind? Monkey the person, apes the person? Well, for many people, you have a picture like that, right? Yeah. So this is what we call the ape parade, where you have this picture of an ape that's growing up and over time evolving into what we call a human being. In fact, this picture I just went online today, and it's still there. This is on the Smithsonian website. But not many people are aware of this, but no evolutionists today believe in this linear progression. And I'll come to that a little bit more later on. But where did we get this idea that ape-like creatures evolved into humans? Anybody want to guess? People guess it's Darwin, right? But it's actually long before Darwin. People who do not believe the Bible have always believed for a long period of time that ape-like creatures have evolved into man. So here's one guy, this is the 18th century. This is maybe 2-3 generations before Charles Darwin. And he would teach about how apes evolved into man. In fact, he laid the groundwork for Charles Darwin later on. And even before him, all kinds of people are trying to come up with all kinds of ways of saying how humans came about. And so you see them drawing these kind of ape-like creatures, imaginary creatures that's supposed to precede man. So here's another one. So here you have 4 pictures. The one on the left, 1400s, this is 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. Pictures becoming more and more like man. You see a long tail, here becoming a shorter tail. So this is not new, right? There's very few things that are actually new. Of course, when it comes to Charles Darwin, he's the one that popularized the modern theory of evolution, or what we call human evolution, this modern idea. And does anybody know what is Charles Darwin's first book? What was the title? If you go to the bookshop, they say The Origin of Species. But that's not the full title. The full title is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Of course, in this first book, he did not really talk about human evolution. But he talked about human evolution in his second book, The Descent of Man. And in this book, you'll find a lot of racist statements about human evolution. And this first part of my talk, I'm going to take you through history. Why is that important? Because I want you to notice how evolutionary theory, their belief, change every couple of decades. See, evolutionists used to think, they'll come up to you and say, human evolution, it's so sure, it's definitely proof of evolution. But I want you to see that throughout history, their understanding of evolution keeps changing all the time. What does that mean? If your theory keeps changing every 10 years, it means that what you believed 10 years ago was not true, right? So Charles Darwin. So around the time of Charles Darwin, one of his contemporaries, in fact, one of his biggest defender, was Thomas Huxley. And because he was such a defender of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, they gave him the nickname Darwin's Bulldog. In the 1870s, now we've gone forward a little bit, he wrote in his book, The Aryan Question and the Prehistoric Man. Does that sound like something in history?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, he talks about how there are 4 racial stocks that gave rise to 9 races. Let's fast forward a little bit. Now in Germany, Ernest Haeckel, one of the leading evolutionists of his time, he gave him the nickname Darwin's Doberman. And Ernest Haeckel wrote about how there are 12 species of man that eventually diversified to form 36 different races. 12 species, yeah, like animals, 12 different species. So here again, the evolutionary understanding has changed in just a few decades. In fact, Ernest Haeckel is responsible for influencing Germany so that Germany became very much an evolutionary believing country. And we know what happened later on in the next century. Let's fast forward a little bit. So now we're in the early 1900s. And here they say there are 3 fundamental human types, the whites, the yellow, and the blacks, related respectively to the chimpanzee, the orang, and the gorilla. So depending on your so-called racial group, you come from a different line of apes. Of course, evolutionists today, they do not believe that we come from these great apes. So if you go to an evolutionist, they will often say this. Say, you creationists, you say that we come from apes. We do not come from apes. We do not come from monkeys. We come from an ape-like common ancestor. And this is really what they believe. So they believe that from a common ancestor, one branch became the great apes that we see today, and the other branch become the Australopithecines, which then evolved into humans today. So we did not come from the chimps, the orangutan, the gorilla, but we all share a common ancestry back there. All right? So that's what they believe. But this belief that we come from chimpanzee, orangutan, and the gorilla, this was what evolutionists used to teach in the past, so that's their view. It keeps changing over time. So let's fast forward a few more decades. We come to this book. And here they actually talks about how we come from, not the apes now, not from the great apes, the gorilla, orangutan, but we come from what they call the Australopithecines, the ape-like creatures. But the same thing, the 4 different so-called races, depending on your race, you come from a different lineage of these Australopithecines, these ape-like creatures. And then later on, a few years later, this is the very first time we see this picture, the ape parade, where you have an ape-like creature that over time slowly becoming man. 1980s, let's go forward again. Now in National Geographic, the same picture there. All the candidates have changed, but still the same picture. And then Smithsonian, just this morning. They still have this picture there today. Okay, so you notice something. Every few decades, the whole theory of evolution has to be completely rewritten. In fact, this is the picture that sticks in many people's mind today. You see this on everywhere, in the TV, in the news, sometimes on T-shirts, you get something like that. But this picture sticks in our mind. But no evolutionary paleoanthropologists, these are people who study the human bones, nobody today believes in this picture. No scientists, rather, believe in this picture. Rather, what they believe is that humans kind of blossom to a tree. And all we are seeing today, all these so-called ape men, are just the tips of the tree. How do they relate with one another? We do not know. So if you open a college-level textbook, this Campbell biology, this is what it shows you. They show you, oh, so the vertical line, that's the time, and they show you all these things. And it gives you the impression that these creatures are slowly evolving in one linear line. But that's not really what they believe. Nobody believes in this today. So what do they really believe? More like something like that. So this is by Richard Klein, and he's, again, a very well-known evolutionist. But by the way, every single quotation you're going to see in this talk, every single one of them is going to be made by an evolutionist, some of the leading evolutionists of our day. And I want you to see what they actually say. Okay, so in this case here, this is not a quotation, but this is a chart that was published. And this is 2009. And in PNAS, very prestigious journal. So this is what we find. He draw this tree. So what's this tree? The solid lines, those are the actual evidence that we see in a fossil record. The thin lines and the dotted dashed lines, those are things that are not there. Those are just what they believe. And the question marks, we have 3 question marks here. Those are the parts they do not know. So if we remove all those things, this is what we're left with. Fully formed fossils in this case. All right? What we know today, this center line I draw here, you see these 3 things here? These 3 creatures, many evolutionists believe that these are not real creatures. These are called what we call basket taxon. I'll cover that in a little while. So what's that? This center category here, these three little ones here, we know today that these are a mixed bone bed. Why? Because if you have 2 specimens and one specimen has a hand like a human being and the other one has a hand like an ape, obviously they cannot be the same creature, right? So these are not real creatures, these are mixed bone bed. And so what you're left with is 2 very different groups. One at the top, the human group, and the bottom, the ape-like creatures. So 2 very distinct groups from what we see today. Here's another one, 2014, and this is by Bernard Wood, another well-known evolutionist. Now, 5 years after the previous chart, we have this chart. And what you see here, again, the ones in blue at the top, those are the humans. And the other colors, those are the ape-like creatures. So we remove the basket taxon, and what you're left with is 2 very distinct groups, the human and the ape-like Australopithecines, ape-like creatures. But you notice something interesting? The 2 trees, look at the base. They're not even connected together. The second thing you realize is that all these branches, they're not even connected. They do not know. So earlier on in the previous picture, you have 3 question marks. Now you have broken branches every single way, and they do not even, the 2 lines do not even intersect with one another. See, evolutionists today are less sure about who our human ancestors were than they were in the past. Those of you who are in this field, you will know this name, Richard Leakey. He will be regarded as a top 3 paleoanthropologist in the world, evolutionist, very famous. Richard Leakey was one of the co-founders of Lucy. In fact, he just passed away in January this year. But notice what he said. He said this: biologists would dearly like to know how modern apes, modern humans, and various ancestral hominids have evolved from a common ancestor. Unfortunately, the fossil record is somewhat incomplete as far as the hominids are concerned, and it's all but blank for the apes. The best we can hope for is that more fossils will be found over the next few years, which will fill the present gap in the evidence. David Pilgrim commented, if you brought in a smart scientist from another discipline and show him the meager evidence with God, he will surely say, forget it, there isn't enough to go on. See, for many people, they think, oh, evolution, the best, human evolution, the best evidence for evolution. But some of the leading human evolutionists, paleoanthropologists, say there's hardly any evidence for that. Here's another well-known evolutionist. For anthropology students 30 years ago, learning human evolution was a breeze. It went from Australopithecus to Homo habilis to Homo erectus to various Homo sapiens, that's humans. It was a straight shot that one could learn in a few minutes at night while cramping for an exam. But in the late 1970s, we entered a golden age of human fossil discoveries that has repeatedly punched holes in the naive idea that our evolution would be that clear, clean, and straight. The straight lines have blossomed into a spreading, rather uncontrolled bush, and we don't like it. We want our history to be nice and neat, but the fossils keep messing us up. We want the last 200,000 years of human evolution, the time when modern Homo sapiens appeared, to make some kind of sense, but it doesn't. By the way, these 200,000 years, even this is out of date now because they've changed the model. Now they say it's 300,000 years ago. Keep changing all the time. This guy is very likely to be maybe the leading African paleoanthropologist. He says every new hominid species further complicates our understanding of human evolution. All bets are now off as to which species is humanity's direct ancestor. So who did we evolve from? They don't know. For a long time, Afarensis, that is Lucy's kind, was considered to be the best candidate as ancestor of our kind. But we are not in that position anymore. Here's another one. There are many reasons for Henry's irritation, but the chief among them is the recognition that there are many links in the change of human evolution, and most, if not nearly all of them, are missing. Anamensis is the latest in a string of recent discoveries that show there's no line of ascent to modern humans. Why don't we see this in the news? These are all quotations from some of the leading paleoanthropologists of our day. So what then do we do with all these creatures? These are the names of the different so-called ape men, some of them humans, Neanderthals, and so on. First thing we should note is that evolutionists and creationists both agree that this can be broadly classified into two big groups: the human group and the ape-like group, the Australopithecines. Okay, you see the way they name it, H, that stands for Homo. So Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalis, that's Neanderthals, Denisovans, that's a Hobbit, and Homo erectus, all humans, all the H. And here you have all the ape-like creatures, the AU, Australopithecines, right, all up there. These Ardipithecus, all the ape-like creatures. And what evolutionists, many of them like to do is they like to split these bones, right? So a little bone, little change in the body morphology, they assign that to be a new species. But it's very likely that all of this can be lumped into two big groups: the human group and the ape-like creatures, the Australopithecines. And there's a very small third group. We call that the basket taxon. And this is the one where I say that most evolutionists today, a lot of them recognize that this is a mixed bone bed. So you have human bones and the Homo bones and the ape-like Australopithecine bones mixed together. So this is not real species. So what are we going to do with Neanderthals, right? Very popular question. Let's deal with Neanderthals. Here's another quotation. The irony is that the scientific community is going to have to come around to the acceptance that Denisovans, which is another human group, and Neanderthals also belong to the species which we call Homo sapiens. They're a big group, just like us. They're all humans, and we know that because we carry their DNA, which means there must have been hybridization. We have been marrying, people have been marrying, producing kids with these people. So what makes a Neanderthal different from what we call the modern human today? A few differences. The biggest difference can be found in the shape of the head. So here you look at a modern human on the left and a Neanderthal on the right. So very human, you have the flat face, but very slight differences. So what do we see? Neanderthals, they tend to have a very strongly developed brow ridge, and this brow ridge gives them a slightly sloping forehead. Second thing you notice, they have a slightly stronger jaw, and they do not have a chin. The chin is kind of receding rather than poking forward, like what we have in modern humans. In fact, paleoanthropologists call this the mental eminence. So if you all touch here, touch your chin, you feel this, the bone, there's an upside down T. That's a mental eminence. Most of us have it today. Not all of us, most of us have it. So Neanderthals, Homo erectus, some of these ancient humans, or what they call ancient humans, do not have that same chin. And they have a slightly bigger brain capacity. So Neanderthals have a slightly bigger brain capacity than most of us, but still in the human range, slightly more elongated, and the back here is like what they call an occipital bun, a small little bun, a bump on their bone. So they look slightly different. But many of these features are actually found in modern humans today. So here you have one, and these pictures, these are actually from the museums. We have people groups that have the same developed nose bridge. Here's Tutankhamun. He doesn't really have the developed chin. Here you actually have Nikolai, and he's actually a former professional heavyweight boxing champion, 2 times champion. Later on became a Russian politician. And we see some of the features here. In this case, the brow ridge with the sloping forehead, which is linked to this brow ridge as well. So the point here is that a lot of these features are actually found in isolated people groups today. So if you go into the books, about 100 years ago, this is the way they would draw Neanderthal. On Neanderthal, this ape-like brutish creature, hairy, stooped over like that. But this picture is out of date. How do the modern reconstructions draw Neanderthals? Here's one. Does it look like an ape-like creature? No, he looked very much like a modern human being. If you're not looking for all the distinctive features I mentioned before, dress this guy up. Nice hair, nice clothes, with a suit. You walk on the street, you may not even notice him. These are other modern reconstructions of what Neanderthal looked like. In fact, this one on the right by BBC, some people joke that he actually looked a little bit like Chuck Norris. Now, of course, Chuck Norris doesn't have some of those Neanderthal features, but the point is this, right? If you dress him up, give him a nice haircut, he could walk in our midst and we would not really notice those differences if we are not looking out for it. Here's another one. So here you have a Neanderthal old man on the left and a young boy on the right, modern reconstruction. Here on the left side, you see a skeleton. The one in brown, that's a Neanderthal skeleton, and the one on the right is a human skeleton. Very similar. Right, so the most of the features are maybe on the head, and they're a bit more stout, they're well built. Maybe the pelvis is slightly more flaring, but very minute differences. When you look like a bone like that should tell you that's human. And here is, of course, a Neanderthal boy. Reconstruction, modern reconstruction. And when you go into the fossil record, what's interesting that as you go back in time, deeper in the layers, what evolution is called, long periods of time, the earliest Neanderthals tend to have features that are mixed with modern humans, with erectus and Neanderthals. So it becomes a little bit hard to classify. So these are some examples of skulls that have a mixture of erectus, Neanderthals, and modern human features in one. And as time goes by, the younger, the more recent Neanderthals tend to develop more unique, distinct Neanderthal, the classic Neanderthal features. But that should tell you they all came from one common human rootstock. So what do we know about Neanderthals today? Well, most people know that we have Neanderthals cave drawings, right? But it's not just cave drawings. We know that they make figurines from ivory and things like that. That's craftsmanship. That takes skill. I can't make something like that. You need to be very skillful. Here you have a Neanderthal barrier, 60-year-old man, religious ceremonies. Right? In this case, he's all these little dots, white dots, you see? Those are jewelry. So what Neanderthals have done here is that they have taken hundreds of mammoth ivory beads, sold that with leather, make ivory bracelets. There's a necklace, pendants of shell, animal skin, animal teeth, and things like that. He wore a leather cap, pants, knee-high boots. Is that an ape-like creature? That's humans. We know from the literature, circular scientific literature, they say the Neanderthals, they use fire, they cook, they fillet their food, they butcher their food, they clean their living quarters, their fireplaces, designated places, their windbreaks, they build shelters, they make musical instruments. So what you see here, that's a bone flute. In fact, the holes are placed not in the same regular position, but different spaces, so that you can play a musical tone. You have music. We know that they make pitch and super glue for their weapons, because they have weapons that are made of multiple parts, and they use some of this glue to glue, for example, the stone head to other parts of the weapons together. So multi-part weapons. They use medicine. They make sophisticated stone tools. They use cosmetics. They care for the elderly. That means they have medicine. We look at what they do and all these things. They tell you that they need to have abstract thinking, communication, speech, symbolic, abstract thinking, strategic hunting. And some of the genetics, people suspect that they actually have light eyes, maybe pale skin, red hair, depending on who you ask, but not absolute, but very likely to have that. The DNA, 99.7% similar to modern humans today. And depending on which paper you look at, anywhere from 2 to 6% of our DNA comes from Neanderthal populations. They're fully human. There's another group, Denisovans. So who is this group? We do not really have much. We just have a few teeth and things like that, small little bones. So we can't really build a good reconstruction of them. But when we look at the DNA, that tells us a lot of things. In fact, some of them, we have one example where we have a fossil. The DNA tells us that one parent is a Neanderthal and one parent is a Denisovan, a first-generation offspring, which means fully human again. Many Southeast Asian, Melanesian populations today, they have a high percentage of Denisovan DNA in their genome. So Neanderthals, Denisovans, humans, all the same created kind, all humans. Let's get to another one, Homo erectus. So who is this? According to evolutionists today, they just pushed the date back to 2.8 million years ago. But these experts say this: does Homo erectus exist as a true taxon, or should it be sunk into Homo sapiens? In other words, he's asking, should we just say that Homo erectus is just another people group? So in the Smithsonian, this is the way they draw Homo erectus. Ape-like creature, dark skin, and so on. They used to say 1.9 million years old from Ethiopia, went to 2.4, and now they extend that to 2.8 million years. On the map here, these red spots are where we find Homo erectus. Notice that they come to Southeast Asia. They have to sail to get to some of these places. So this is what is in the Smithsonian. But how do modern reconstructions draw Homo erectus? Looking at their bones, this is what you call a Homo erectus from China. Here's a Homo erectus from Africa. Does it look very much like human beings? Not an ape-like creature. A very well-known author as well on this topic, he asked this question: is he, that means Homo erectus, is he a missing link? The answer must be no. Not as a being who stood halfway between the apes and modern humans. The skeleton is too human-like for that. So like Neanderthals, we saw what they did. Let's look at erectus. What do we know about Homo erectus? We know that some of them sail in groups of up to 20 people. They have to go together in rhythm to be able to get to some of these islands. Why? Because some of these islands, they are about 12 miles apart, and you have strong currents that run through the area perpendicularly. If they do not cooperate, they'll be washed out with this current into the Indian Ocean. They'll be lost forever. So they need communication. They need navigation. They need foresight, abstract thinking, communication, speech. We know that they make beads, pendant jewelry. They use stone tools, bone tools, control use of fire, fireplaces. Like Neanderthals, they cook, they skin fish, they clean their food, they butcher their food, they transport large game. They drew cave art, sewing of clothes from skin, production of fibers, resins. We know their family structure, and again, they care for their sick. Ape or human? Should be very obvious. Let's look at another one. Homo naledi. This is a very recent find. In the last 10 years or so, this has been in the news a lot. So who is Homo naledi? Remember, I talked about Neanderthals, I talked about erectus. So Homo erectus is very much like modern humans, just like Neanderthals, but instead, Neanderthals have a slightly bigger brain capacity. Homo erectus, you have a very small brain. Sloping forehead, but very small brain. But in every way, human. Homo naledi, you take Homo erectus, just imagine, if you shrink him down so it's even smaller in size, his brain is make it even smaller, you get something like Homo naledi. And this one, we find 1,500 bones, a lot of them, which seems from at least 15 individuals. And they found a very deep cave. And this deep cave is so deep and so dark that the really only way to get in there, you have to crawl through really small holes. You need small-sized people to crawl in there. And then you need fire because it's so dark. So you need to take a fire. In fact, when you're trying to look for these bones, took a light source, go in there 45 minutes, just to get to where some of these bones are. So how did these bones get in there? I would think that this is very likely to be a burial site. In fact, the scientists needed ropes, they needed climbing equipment just to enter this place. So in the past, if they did not have flashlights or a light source, they have to use fire just to get in these places. So this is not something that you would expect from an ape-like creature. So they found 1,500 bones of this creature. So human or ape? Very small in size, even smaller brain. Well, let's look at the diagnostic characteristics. Some of these, they have slightly curved finger bones, but these are within the human range. But what do I mean by diagnostic characteristics? We just want to look at characteristics that they have that will tell us whether these are humans or apes. So one of the ways we can look at is looking at the jaw. So humans, the second one, Homo sapiens here, we have a jaw that takes on a U shape. And this is very well known, evolutionists agree. Homo naledi have the same U shape. If you look at the apes that we have there, or the Australopithecines, even the chimps, they all have what we call a V-shaped jaw. So Homo naledi, that's similar to humans. Let's look at their feet. Just naledi feet. Let's fill in the missing bones. That's a human feet. Right? How do apes, what kind of feet do they have? So here's an orangutan. Notice that? Their feet looks like a hand, has an opposable toe. Right? Naledi has a hand just like humans, a foot just like humans. It's human. Let's look at their hands. So everybody do this? Okay, I want you to see which part, your thumb, right? Which part of where does it meet your index? Notice here, this is human. It goes somewhere in between here. Chimps, they have a long finger and a short thumb, so their thumb reaches somewhere here. Okay, easy to follow? You follow with me? Let's look at Homo naledi. That is a human hand. And then when we look at Homo naledi, we look at their brain and things like that. We know it has a human brain. Because inside the cranium, you have parts of the brain. You can see the imprint of the brain. It has parts of the brain that is clearly human, only present in human and not present in the ape-like creatures. Human brain, human hands, human feet, human jaw. What is that? Human. Okay. Let's go to another one. Homo floresiensis, or the popular name for this is the hobbit. So this one is found in Indonesia. In fact, in this cave, this creature is even slightly smaller, very tiny, and even smaller brain. So Homo naledi, the small one, saw earlier on, that's Africa. This is in Indonesia, on a small island, very much like Homo erectus. How do they get to those islands? They have to sail to get there. And what's interesting is that these small creatures, on that same island, we find pygmy elephants. They're about this tall. Okay, the extinct pygmy. So they were they were hunting these creatures. So they had stone tools and things like that, very likely. So very much like Homo naledi you saw earlier on, just like Homo erectus, but smaller in size, smaller in brain, they're found in a cave. And nearby, they found butchered remains of dwarf elephants. So they made tools and hunted. Very strange, right? So why are these creatures so small? It turns out that in Indonesia today, in that same area, there are people living there who are also very small in size. This is from the Wampasasa tribe, the Wampasasa pygmies, in the same area living there today. And so Homo erectus bones are also found on the same islands, which according to evolutionists, I do not believe these dates, they're 800,000 years old. Well, this hobbit is dated to 18,000 years old, okay, using the evolutionary dates. 18,000 years, that's very recent. So this guy, off the bat, he cannot be a missing link. You follow with me? He's too young in the evolutionary dates. But this guy that is here, from that tribe, very old man, he's actually about 4 feet tall. So the hobbit is slightly smaller, about 3 feet. But the people in this island, they're all very small in size. I am very short myself, but this guy will be even smaller. And hobbit will be even smaller. Remember what I said about that chin? The protruding chin, the inverted T shape on your bone? So the hobbit doesn't have that chin as well. But when you look at the tribe here, 93%, no, sorry, this is a small brain. So brain size, let me get into the brain size first. So Homo erectus has a brain size about 940. You have Homo sapiens, or modern humans, sorry, so 1300. And then you have, but brain size doesn't tell you the intelligence of a creature just off the bat. Because we know, for example, if you keep dogs, some of the big dogs, because they're bigger in size, they have bigger brains, but that doesn't make them smarter than the smaller dogs. See, brain size itself doesn't tell you. It's more of how the brain is wired. So, for example, we have a Nobel Prize winner for literature, and his brain size is just 933 cubic centimeters. That's smaller than your average Homo erectus size. But it's a Nobel Prize winner. 1800s, you have a man, 660, yet he functioned normally. No mental issues with him as well. So Hobbit size is much smaller. The brain is really small. It's very strange. If you're wondering how big this is, if you think about your water bottle, the plastic water bottle, that's about 500. So the brain capacity is just slightly smaller than that. But like I said earlier on, brain size doesn't tell you their intelligence. So this hobbit that live in this area lacks that inverted teeth on their chin. But the people who are living there today, 93% of them do not have that chin as well. So they are the same, and they're very small. So the chin alone cannot tell you whether these creatures are ancient or modern. But one thing we know that from some of these, the pictures that we have from Hobbit is that they have asymmetrical faces, deformities, and we see these Neanderthals, Erectus, and things like that. And this suggests to us that these creatures, very likely, they were inbred for long periods of time. And that's why they get some of these developmental abnormalities. So what else do we know from Hobbit? If we compare them with the people living there today, the Rampasasa tribe, that old man they saw earlier on, we see a lot of similarities. I show you about their chin, but we can also look at their teeth. See, one thing about the Hobbit is that one of their molar is actually rotated 90 degrees. And interestingly, look at this jaw of the people who are living there today. Many of them have the same rotated molar. They are the same. Like Homo erectus, some of them are found on these islands of Indonesia. They have to sail 12 miles with coordination in groups. See, this arrow here? That's a sea current, strong sea current that will wash them into the Indian Ocean if they do not sail in the right way. So again, strategic thinking, speech, planning, navigation, abstract thought. Human or apes? Humans again, very clear. All right, so we have seen Neanderthals, Homo erectus, Denisovans, the Hobbit, Homo naledi, they're all humans. So what do we know? Why do these people have all these strange features, right? They're born slightly different from us. In the last 5 to 7 years, we have many circular research papers that give us a clue. See, we now know today that Neanderthals, for example, are highly inbred. And we know that from the DNA, from the genes and things like that. For example, look at the genes. This paper in Nature 2014 tells us that many of these Neanderthals, they were highly inbred for many generations. Some of their parents are half siblings. They mated with close relatives. So what does that cause? All kinds of developmental deformities, genetic mutations accumulating and things like that. A second paper tells us Neanderthal males, they had decreased fertility. Many of the genes that today are associated with all kinds of diseases. Neanderthals had very limited genetic diversity. How do we know that? Well, in our DNA, we know we take half of our DNA from our mom, half from our dad, right? So we share different copies. But in Neanderthals, they have a lot of the same mutations, the same places, which tells you that they have been inbred for long periods of time. So they believe the highly inbred, small tribes, widely dispersed, nomadic people, maybe, for long periods of time, hunter-gatherers. And the Neanderthals, Denisovans, we know that they are inbred. So like I say, low genetic variation. This is another paper again in 2016 in genetics. They have many harmful mutations. Neanderthals in this paper are estimated to have 40% lower fitness than humans on average. These are inbred people groups. So maybe that's why they develop a lot of these unique features from inbreeding. But they are fully human. So here's a very well-known paper. Eric Trinkus, probably the leading expert on Neanderthals. So what he did, he looked at all these so-called ancient humans. He looked at 66 individuals. And in these 66 individuals, he found 75 extremely rare developmental abnormalities, asymmetrical faces, deformed bones, and things like that. And he again came to the same conclusion, that these people groups were highly inbred. So there's a lot of agreement even among the evolutionary community about these people groups. Here's another one. This paper, you remember the earlier paper we said that Neanderthals are maybe 40% less fit? This other paper tells us, they calculate that if Neanderthals were just 8% less fit, in 4,000 years they will all go extinct. You see that? So these are just a degenerate people group. So we have looked at all this on the right side, all humans. Now let us deal with the left side, the ape-like creatures. Let's look at the most famous one, Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy's kind. Of course, the center one I explained is a mixed bone bed. So who is Lucy? Lucy's kind, Australopithecus afarensis. They found these bones. In some books, they tell you they found 30-40% of their bones. It's actually only about 20%. And just recently, after 40 years, they found that one of the bones is actually from a baboon. So we know at least some of the bones are mixed. But what is interesting is in the original Lucy, they do not have hand bones, they do not have feet bones. And Lucy at the start was actually pretty much found by these two people, Donald Johanson and Richard Leakey. I already explained Richard Leakey, and Donald Johanson is also one of the leading paleoanthropologists. So I did my degree about 16 years ago. Since that time, every single evolutionary candidate that I was taught in school, every single one of them has been thrown out the window. They're no longer ancestor, and every single one are now considered to be a sidechain, unrelated to our ancestry. So when I first joined CMI 6 years ago, I decided, hey, I need to keep myself up to date. I went to do an online course with Donald Johanson, the founder of Lucy as well, both of them. But not many people are aware that Donald Johanson and Richard Leakey, when they first found Lucy's kind, they were in complete agreement that this is a mixed bone bed of Homo, which is humans, and the ape-like creatures mixed together. And that's Lucy's kind. So this is actually a bone bed which is mixed with hundreds of bones, with more than a dozen mammal species mixed together. So like I said earlier on, one of the bones recently was discovered to be from a baboon. But they found a knee joint that was very identical to humans. Partial thigh bone, pelvis, very human-like from waist down. But they don't have hands bone, they don't have feet bones here. But from the waist above, they found many bones that were very clearly ape-like. Knuckle-locking mechanisms in the hands. The skull is clearly ape-like, not human, sloping face and things like that. But then they begin to find, in Africa, about 1,000 miles away, far away, what became known as Latoli footprints. And this set of footprints, 77 footprints, right? That look very much like human. That was made by 3 individuals. A child, an adult, and maybe a juvenile, teenager maybe. In fact, one of them was actually walking in the footsteps of the adult, just like what you would expect that what kids would do today. So this set of footprints was found 1,000 miles away, but it was dated about 500,000 years older than Lucy. So wait a minute, if Lucy is our missing link, and we have human footprints here, how can Lucy be our missing link, right? So what do? Donald Johanson turned around and said these footprints must have been made by Lucy's kind. So he named his species, which he used to say was a mixed bone bed. Now he said that's Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy's kind. But does this look like an ape-like creature? No, that's a human foot on the left here. That's an ape foot. You see that? The opposable toe, like a hand? That's a human foot. So they say Lucy must be bipedal. You see their thinking and how they come to that conclusion? But Richard Leakey still continued to believe that this is not a new creature. He still believed that Lucy's kind was a mixed bone bed of Homo and apes. And that caused a split between them. And they went their separate ways. And to the day he died, he still believed that Lucy's bone is a mixed bone bed. But you don't hear that in the news, do you? Of course, Richard Leakey passed away in January this year. But this is what some of the other scientists say about Laetoli footprints. Indistinguishable from those of modern humans. They say that if the footprints were not known to be so old, we would readily conclude that they were made by a member of our genus, fully human. But because of the evolutionary presupposition, they have to look at that and say, oh, Lucy must have made that. So in the museums, if you go around the world, they often draw Lucy with this, with human feet, human hands. But remember, the original fossil about Lucy did not have bones of hands and feet. Well, Lucy is one specimen. But over the years, we have found many other bones of Lucy's kind. So what do we know now? We know that from the feet bones, from these other specimens of the same kind, Australopithecus afarensis, that's Lucy's kind, had toes that are curved. They have a big toes, the opposable toe, just like an ape. So very different from Laetoli footprints. In fact, these feet could not have made the footprints that you saw earlier on. So who made the human footprints, human-like footprints? Humans, right? And then they begin to find, over the years, there's been so many years, more than 400 bones and fragments, 37 foot bones, including a partial foot. They look at the ear canal, look at the balance. This is a tree-dwelling ape-like creature. Ape-like feet, long curved fingers. And it says here, that can only be understood as adaptation for grasping such as occurs in arboreal location, that means in a tree dwelling. There's no evidence that any extant primate has long, curved, heavily muscled hands and feet for any purpose other than to meet the demands of full and part-time arboreal life. So since then, they found the proximal phalanges, that's the fingers. The fingers are similar to African apes. They look at the toes, like I said, the divergent toe, like a hand, similar to apes. And then they look at the bones in the feet, which used to be claimed to be to indicate that these are bipedal, these are apes that walk on 2 feet. Now the conclusion has changed. It shows that's very similar to eastern gorillas. So this is very likely to be an ape-like creature. Maybe some of the bones are mixed, but overall, this is an ape-like creature. So a tree-dwelling ape, very likely to be non-bipedal. The ear canal suggests it's definitely a tree-dwelling creature. It's possible, as I said, that there are some human bones mixed in the waist down. It's hard to tell. But in 2015, it's reported in the journal that at least one, like I mentioned, one of his bones in his spine or his neck is actually from a baboon. So we know at least partially mixed there. And like I said earlier on, most evolutionists today don't even regard Lucy as our direct ancestor. They put her out as one of the unrelated side chains. And the footprints, what do they suggest to us? Were they made by humans? That's just Lucy. But if we look at the fossil record and we look at human footprints using the evolutionary dates that I do not believe, what's the oldest human-like footprints that we find? It's from this island in Greece. 5.7 million years old using evolutionary dates. If this is made by it's a human-like footprint, if it's made by humans, this placed humans using the evolutionary dates older than any of the so-called missing links. So what are you going to do with that? So evolutionists, same thing, turn around, say that must have been made by ape-like creatures who were bipedal. So the basket taxon, we have 2 here, Homo habilis. Many evolutionists themselves have struck this off the list. Let's look at second one, Australopithecus sediba. So how do we know that this is a mixed bone bed? Well, they found they have at least minimum of 6 different species, but there's 2 main ones. We call that MH1 and MH2. So these 2 skeletons, 40% to 60% complete. And these were actually found in a shallow open pit with 18 other species mixed together with it. Okay, so if you look at the pelvis, the hip is similar to Homo erectus, so very human-like. We look at the upper rib cage, and it seems to have a funnel shape, very much like an ape. In fact, the tree-dwelling rib cage does not match the bipedal hip. You see, it's all connected. You cannot have one that's dwelling, tree-dwelling, and one that's bipedal. It doesn't really match well. And then second thing, we note that the lower rib actually suggests to us that's bipedal. So the top part of the rib suggests it's not bipedal. The lower part suggests it's bipedal. It's walking on 2 feet. By the way, the bones are not in one skeleton. They're all scattered about. So who is this? Well, we look at the upper limbs, and everybody agrees the upper limbs is ape-like. The shoulder blade is very similar to chimpanzee. But the hands, interestingly, are very human-like. It has an opposable thumb, and the proportions very much like humans. So again, we see that mismatch there. They find stone tools nearby. Were they made by them? But evolutionists say, oh, it cannot be because the upper limbs are very much like apes, right? So those stone tools cannot have been made by them. So very strange, right? Mixture. But could this be that this creature is really a mosaic? Or how do we know that there are two different creatures mixed together? Well, the skull is ape-like. Everybody agrees. And we look at the brain endocast. So we can look at the brain, and if we say earlier on, if we look at the scan, the inner part of the brain, they leave an imprint of the way, the structure of the brain. It tells us this creature has an ape-like brain. Very small brain again at the bottom. But here's where it gets interesting. On one specimen, the backbone has the S shape. It's humans, right? So at MH1, there's a backbone that's similar to Homo erectus, humans. But on the second specimen, it's an ape-like bone. So how can that be? On one, MH1, it's an ape-like jaw. Second one has a human jaw. So obviously, this cannot be one creature. This is a mixed bone bed. So that is what we call the basket taxon. These are not real creatures, a mixed bone bed of different creatures mixed together. So let's get back to this chart earlier on, 2014 by Bernard Woods in Scientific America. Science. What we know from science today, the evolutionists themselves today are less sure about human evolution than they were 30 years ago. Like we said earlier on, the branches in this picture don't even intersect one another. And all these spaces, those are all the unknowns. Where's your human evolution? So if you look at the scientific literature, and that's a timeline you see here. So again, let me emphasize, I do not believe in the millions of years, but let us just use the dates. Like all these quotations you see here, every single one of them are made by evolutionists themselves. So here, if you draw a timeline, human fossils, that's the 5.5 million year old footprint. These are all the other human find, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, humans. And this is the so-called ape-like creatures, Australopithecines. You notice something? The humans go further back than the apes. Where's your human evolution? Bernard Woods say this: the origin of our own genus, humans, remain frustratingly unclear. Even with all the fossil evidence and analytical techniques from the past 50 years, a convincing hypothesis for the origin of Homo remains elusive. So who is our human ancestor? He doesn't know. He doesn't know. And yet people are going to school, to colleges. They think human evolution is the best evidence that evolution happened in the past. Everything I learned in school 16 years ago, the whole thing has changed. Has anyone heard of the claim that humans and chimps are 98.5% similar? Who has heard of that? DNA? Do you know where we get this figure from? That figure was actually by Dr. John Elquist, this person here that we interviewed in Creation Magazine. Dr. John Elquist was one of the leading bird experts in his day. And this figure, 98.5% similar, came from the late 1970s. Okay, and he came out with this using a method that nobody uses today, 98.5% similar. Imagine this. This is the late 1970s. This is more than one generation before we even had the draft of the Human Genome Project. 98.5% similar out of 3 billion letters. That is a lot of difference between chimps and humans. John Alquist, who saw this, he realized that this gap, 1.5%, is too big for evolutionists to account for it. So he went back to look at the data, struggled with that. Later on, he became a Christian and rejected the number. He's a creationist. He just passed away a few years ago. In fact, I have a lot of personal correspondence with him, talking about how his conversion and things like that, looking at this evidence. So what do we know about chimps and humans today? It really depends on what you test. But estimates depending on what you test today is no longer 98.5% similar, even just anywhere from 80 to maybe 95%, depending on what you test. And if we test the Y chromosome, remember in Dr. Carter's talk earlier on, Y chromosome is something that all guys have. If you try to compare the Y chromosome in humans to Y chromosomes of apes, it's really hard to compare. Why? Because half of it is missing. And the other half that's similar enough to even compare is about 70% similar. There's no common ancestry there. Genetics have destroyed this idea of human evolution. So the next time you hear someone tell you, humans and chimps are 98.5% similar, ask them the question, do you know where this figure came from? And do you know that the guy who came up with that became a creationist? Good science supports the Bible. So again, we interviewed him in Creation magazine. So make things easy. Again, if you're here this morning, you know how important this magazine is for updating you guys to the latest news, equip you with some of this information that you hear today. If you're interested to know more about this, there's 2 resources I would like to cover. One is this DVD called Dismantled, very high quality documentary. This is not produced by us, but we think that this is really helpful that we decide to stop this. So this talks about some of the things you hear today about the bones, but it also covers a lot into genetics in much more detail. And then we have a book, maybe the most comprehensive book on human evolution, in my opinion, the best one from the creation perspective, looking at all these things that you see today. Every single quotation you see today, every single comparison, is all from this one book. Okay, so if you want this book, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's very detailed, technical, but if this is something you want to equip yourself in, this is the book that you must get. There are only 4 copies in the back, so you have to be fast. But if the evidence is so clear, why do most people still believe in evolution? Why do they believe that human evolution is the best proof of evolution, so to speak? Because most people only hear one side of the story. Most people never get to hear all these things that you just heard today. All the bones, the evidence, look at the genetics, they never hear that. They only hear one story, the evolution story. But there are answers. This is a wonderful time to be a Christian because we have answers to all these questions that previous generations could not have existed. But most people only hear one side of the story. But there's another group of people, and these are the people who have heard all this, but they still choose not to believe. And one example of somebody is this well-known, world-famous atheistic philosopher, Thomas Nagel. And I want you to see what he says. He said this, he admitted this. He says, I want atheism to be true, and I am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just I don't believe in God and naturally hope I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. Why? I don't want the universe. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Why? Why would he say something like that? Because if there is a creator, we are his creation. We cannot live our life any way we choose. If there's a creator, one day we have to give an account for our life. There are consequences to ideas. But if God exists and if we are going to stand before God one day to give an account for our life, you can choose to cover your eyes and say, no, I don't believe in God. That doesn't change and take one day you still stand before God. there are consequences to ideas. If you're sitting here today and you're wondering, and you haven't got your life right before God, maybe it's time to do so. Maybe this is one of the most important questions you can ask yourself. What must you do today? At the end of the day, God's word can be trusted. The gospel is the solution. And with that, I would like to end this session, and I would like to open up this time for question and answers. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Same thing, the same rules you heard earlier on. Please limit your question to creation and evolution. All right, and if you can ask me questions about the bones and things like that, if you have questions on genetics, Dr. Carter there, I think, is maybe the leading expert on this topic from human genetics, population genetics. So, anyone? Yes, at the back.
So as science seems to have increased, and the argument is more for creationism, do you find that your peers that are non-Christian are trying to scramble to fill in the gaps, and are you noticing that they're maybe a little more lashing out toward creationism and maybe CMI in general?
Is there more lashing out and things like that? I believe, yes, in one sense, but I believe that this opposition has always been there. But now we have a lot of these things that you're seeing today, genetics, some of this information about the bones that were not around 15, 20 years ago. But remember the talk this morning that Dr. Carter gave. Science is not neutral. Science has to be interpreted by our philosophical worldview. And if you're coming from an evolutionary perspective, some things are going to match, are going to make sense. Remember that filter that he showed earlier on? But there are a lot of things that they cannot make sense of. But the alternative is creation. And many people, like the philosopher you saw earlier on, he's not willing to go there. Because the moment you admit that there's a creator, you have to give an account for your life. And the other side, like I say, many other people only get to hear one side of the story. They never get to hear the other side of the story. And that's where you guys come in, I think. Equip yourself with the answers so that you can go to these people and say, hey, look, start from the Bible. And everything begins to make much more sense. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that in a sense, yes, the evidence does support us a lot more. A lot of people never get to hear the news, and some of them who do hear, they are like that. Because if they admit that the creationists are right, what does that imply? Anybody else? Yes, at the back.
Are you finding similar gaps in the evolutionary, presupposed patterns of chickens came from dinosaurs and things like that? Are there similar gaps like that coming up in the animal evolution?
Chickens and dinosaurs, yes, I actually have a slide on that. I have a whole dinosaur talk. And I'll cover some of that. So evolutionists believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds. But let me start from the Bible. If you start from the Word of God, does the Bible ever say that God could not have created feathered dinosaurs? It doesn't say that, right? So God could have created feathered dinosaurs. That would not impact the creation model in any way. But evolutionists, they are desperate to find evidence of feathered dinosaurs. Why? Because if it's not there, how do they explain in the model that dinosaurs evolved into birds? So it's very important for the model. And one of the evidence they look at this dinosaur that you see here. This is very clearly a dinosaur. You have a reptilian lung there. And you have this fuzzy structure at the back. You see that? You say, oh, this is dino-fuzz. This fuzzy structure is these dinosaurs that are growing this hair-like, what they call proto-feathers, on their way to becoming feathers. And that is what they use to provide this idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds. So that's Sinaiopteryx. But like I said earlier on, God could have created creatures like this. So here we have a platypus, right? A mosaic creature. A platypus lay eggs like a reptile. It's a tail like a beaver, a foot like an otter, a bill like a duck. But it's a mammal, right? And on his spur, on his hind foot, there's a little spur that can actually deliver venom, like a reptile. It's semi-aquatic. It can even sense electrical signals. So swimming in dirty, muddy water can use electrical signals, sense it. Can even find little food and shrimps and fish that are hiding behind a stone. Yeah, if God could have created creatures like this, he could have certainly created feathered dinosaurs. But the question is this: does the evidence show that they are actually feathered? The paper that reported that said this: the feathery structures seem to most closely resemble modern birds, and that they may have been hollow. Wow, convincing. But at the bottom, he says this: the structures are piled so thick, it has not been possible to isolate a single one for examination. They haven't looked at it under the microscope. This little fuzzy thing here. Well, so what is this fuzzy thing here? Two evolutionists, Alan Fiducia and Lingam Solaya Tiergarten, very well-known experts in their field, they begin to do some experiments. So what they did was they took carcasses of sharks and dolphins and they buried them under the ground for 1 year. And then after 1 year, they opened that up and they studied the carcass. Who would like to do that for a job? And on these carcasses, after 1 year, they begin to find all these similar fuzzy structures forming. It turns out those are just decayed collagen fibers. And what's collagen? It's just a protein, a structured protein in your body. They say anywhere from 20-25% of your body protein is actually, of your structure, your body mass, come from collagen. It's just a structured protein. And as collagen breaks down, some of them form many different types of this fuzzy-looking structure, the fibers. And what he did, he saw the same exact structure. And then he looked at fossils of marine extinct reptiles like this, the ichthyosaur. He looked at fossil flying reptiles like plesiosaurs, those are the flying reptiles. And you see the exact same structures forming. And he said this: the fibers show a striking similarity to the structure and levels of organization of dermal collagen, skin collagen. The proposal that these fibers are protofeathers is dismissed. Okay, so this is from Jurassic Park, right? So what's the very first Jurassic Park? Of course, the latest one, they draw them with feathers, Jurassic World. But Jurassic Park, what's the name of this dinosaur? Everybody say Velociraptor. It's actually the cousin Deinonychus. Okay, the real Velociraptor is about the size of a large dog, but in the movie, they make them bigger after the cousin Deinonychus. Because the movie producers say, Deinonychus, that's very boring. That's the one you see, right? So they make Deinonychus, and they name it after his smaller cousin, Velociraptor. So when I was young, I grew up thinking that's Velociraptor. But Velociraptor, in the real one, the small one, today, if you go, Deinonychus even, in the museums, they draw them with feathers like that. But do these creatures have feathers? You go to the museum, that's how they draw Deinonychus, all these feathers. No, we don't have a single fossil of Deinonychus with feathers, not a single one. So what do they use? They say, look at the bones of Velociraptor. They have what they call quill knobs on its bone. So on the arms, so here you have a turkey vulture. You have these little bumps, you see that? So these are muscle attachment sites for feathers. So look at that. Those are birds today. They say if you look at Velociraptor, this Velociraptor bone, zoom into the bone 10 times, so 10-time magnification. See all these arrows? Do you see the tiny bumps there? You hardly see the bones there, right? So those must also be quill knobs. They don't resemble quill knobs at all. Second thing is that these things, on the Velociraptor, these bones, they're unevenly spaced. And they're actually on the wrong side of the arm. So these are not quill knobs at all. There's nothing to do with feathers. These really tiny bones are very likely to be muscle attachment sites. Okay, let me just fast forward. I can show you more of this later on. But let me just deal with this, back to this. Give me 2 minutes to deal with this. So why do we say that the collagen fibers look?
We're going
why,
to 3 sessions now.
Why do you think that they look like collagen fibers? These are all marine reptiles, great white shark. This is what the collagen fibers look like. This is marine fossils. The hair-like structures are just collagen. So on the left, marine fossils. Here is the so-called feathered dinosaurs, same structures found. Here, marine fossils, you see this? It looks bunching, it looks like feathers, it looks like hair. But that's just, again, marine reptiles, collagen. On the left here, that's the feathered dinosaur from the same creature you saw earlier on, the fuzzy structure at the back. These wavy things, we see the same things in decaying dolphins. Dolphins don't fly. This similar thing, that's just collagen, and in that same dinosaur. So the short story short, all those so-called evidence of feathered dinosaurs are much more consistent, the view that they are just collagen fibers. There's no evolution there for you. And I hope that answers that question. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Man, great information. It's hard to stop, isn't it? I mean, this stuff is fascinating. It's very easy to listen to. Thank you. Very good information, well presented. Again, we just want to thank Dr. Robert Carter and Joel Tay for coming, and man, just really giving us some good information over 3 sessions today. So thank you, guys. Well, guys, let me just pray, and then we'll go ahead and break. And these guys will be around. So again, there's still great resources, great information out there. Those guys will be hanging out for a little bit. So if you have any additional questions, I'm sure they'd love to talk with you some more. But I'll go ahead and pray, and then we can break for this evening. Lord, we thank you so much for your goodness, for your faithfulness, Lord. Thank you for your truth and your wisdom. Lord, thank you for giving us the ability, Lord, just to know you, to know your word, to learn and know about the things in the world around us, Lord, and just see how these things actually prove your word and prove your truth. And they don't diminish it. They don't take away from it at all. And so, Father, thank you. Thank you for today. Thank you for the freedom that we have to gather together to talk about these things, to learn of these things. And thank you for the wisdom that you've unlocked, the information and knowledge that you've unlocked for us to know and understand and just see that these things are true. Lord, go before us this week. Lord, remind us of the things we need to be reminded of. And as we bump into people and have conversations and get to share just the good things that we've learned today. And Lord, we just put it all in your hands, and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. God bless you guys, and we'll see you soon.